When do you experience the positive emotion that's associated with happiness? The answer is, not when you've attained a goal, but when you're pursuing one. So you're set up, your positive emotion is associated with movement forward. You could say that your positive emotion is the psychological equivalent of forward movement, just as your negative emotion is the psychological equivalent of freezing or retreating. And so your emotions are very tightly tied to your action. Freeze, retreat, negative. Advance towards a goal, positive. No goal, no positive emotion. Now, if you don't remember anything else from tonight, that's a good thing to remember. No goal, no positive emotion. A corollary of that as well is no goal, confusion. So no goal not only means no positive emotion, it also means confusion, and confusion means anxiety and dread. And so a life without a goal is confusing and hopeless. And that begs the question, what should the goal be? And that's partly what we're trying to establish. You rode for 15 minutes, you try to develop a vision for your life. Now you have something to move toward. That sets up the precondition for potential positive emotion and happiness. What else do you need to motivate you? Well, how about negative emotion? So what do you do with that? Well, negative emotion can stop you. You might think, well, I'd like to get a better job, but I'm afraid of putting myself out in the job market. I'm afraid of being evaluated. I'm afraid that if I tried something more difficult, I might fail. Then you have your negative emotion opposing you, right? It's anxiety is stopping you. And fair enough, because there are things to be anxious about. But what if you could get your negative emotion behind you, pushing you instead of stopping you? Sometimes in my clinical practice, I would have clients who hated their job. They're laboring under the thumb of a tyrant. And maybe that was partly because they'd turned themselves into slaves, but it didn't matter. They were laboring under the thumb of a tyrant. They needed to make a move, laterally or up. They needed to make a move. And they were often afraid to, and they had their reasons. They didn't want to contemplate their resumes. They didn't want to open up their CVs. They didn't want to face the inadequacies of their past. They were afraid of being evaluated. They were afraid of being rejected. They didn't know how to negotiate. They didn't know how to conduct themselves in an interview. They were afraid of losing the security they'd already built up. They had their fears, and they were real, and those fears stopped them. But they'd come to me and say, oh my God, you know, I'm so miserable. My life is so miserable. And we'd take that apart. And one of the reasons was because they were laboring under the thumb of a tyrant. And then we'd talk that through, and they'd say, well, I'm afraid to make a change. And I'd say, well, that's okay. That's understandable. How afraid are you of not making a change? Let's make a little vision of that. You're 35, you hate your job. What's the consequence? You're not motivated. You don't want to get out of bed in the morning. You're starting to get depressed. You're getting bitter. You're getting resentful. You're getting cynical. You're amotivated at work. You're not doing a very good job. And you're starting to shrink. Now play that out for 10 years. You don't change it. You don't fix it. And what happens? Well, it's not like it's going to get better of its own accord. What's going to happen to you? Well, for sure, at minimum, what's going to happen to you is you're going to be in the same situation, but 10 years older. And if you can't get out of that situation now, what the hell makes you think you're going to get out of it in 10 years? You're 10 years older, you're 10 years more bitter, you're 10 years more cynical. Maybe by that time your marriage has collapsed because who the hell wants to live with you? You're even more of a slave than you were because you've labored another 10 years under the thumb of the tyrant and stepped backwards every time you were asked to, so you got smaller and smaller as the tyrant got bigger and bigger. It's like, think about that, and that means imagine it. Imagine that, okay? Now that's the situation. You're stuck where you are, but it's 10 years from now.